The total blockade of Cuba by the United States of America led to a catastrophe on the island. Cuba has not received oil from abroad for a month, and its own reserves have been depleted. This has caused everyday life on the island to come to a halt. The Cuban authorities have introduced fuel rationing, limited the operation of public transportation, and sent employees on leave. There are hardly any cars on the city streets, and electricity is not supplied to homes for most of the day. The tourism industry, which is vital for the economy, is completely paralyzed, hotels are shutting down entirely, and even Russians have started to leave the island in a hurry. For example, the Russian airline Rossiya has urged Russians to leave as soon as possible, since it will soon stop its flights. And all this is because starting from February 10, Cuba announced that it will no longer refuel planes arriving on the island. Although I should note that international airports around the world refuel planes, Cuba says they have no fuel and tourists are massively refusing to fly to the island. Food prices have skyrocketed, which has led to a huge food crisis. Meanwhile, the Trump administration, which cut off the flow of oil to Cuba, has officially banned any trade or business relations with Russia in Venezuela. Let's discuss this topic together. My name is Pechiy. Let's talk about this together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave any comment under this video, and subscribe to my Telegram channel Pechiy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we post breaking news as it comes in and of course announcements of new episodes here on YouTube. So, a total collapse has begun in Cuba, which experts predicted after Donald Trump announced an effective blockade of the island. Communist Cuba, which Russia so actively supports in words, has not received any oil from abroad for a month, and its own reserves are almost depleted. As the Wall Street Journal writes, everyday life on the island is coming to a halt. Now, gasoline at gas stations is only available with ration cards, and public transportation has stopped because there's nothing to fuel it with. And government employees are simply being sent on vacation because many places are just shutting down, transportation isn't working, and workers can't get to their jobs, so they're being told to take time off. There are hardly any cars on the city streets, and electricity isn't supplied to homes for most of the day. And the most important sector for Cuba's economy, tourism, has been paralyzed. Some popular hotels, suffering from constant power outages, have started to close, and tourists are simply being relocated to other places to stay. And importantly, this has affected Russians as well. There are now officially more than 4,000 of them on the island, and that's just tourists. And now, Rossiya Airlines, which is part of Aeroflot, has limited flights and started evacuating tourists from Cuba, urging Russians to leave the island as soon as possible. And now you'll understand the full scale of the disaster. Under normal circumstances, at any airport in the world, planes are refueled before departure. It's a standard procedure. But now, Russians are sending empty planes to Cuba to save fuel and make sure there's enough for the return trip. Why is that? The thing is, since February 10, foreign aircraft are officially no longer refueled at international airports in Cuba. As a result, some airlines started refueling on neighboring islands, while some airlines simply refused to fly to Cuba because it's dangerous. And here I would like to remind you that Donald Trump, in his executive order from January 29, called Cuba an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security of the United States of America. He threatened those countries that try to deliver oil to Cuba with import tariffs. And the last shipment of oil Cuba received was all the way back on January 9 from Mexico. Venezuela, which was the main supplier of oil to Cuba, selling it at a big discount, has stopped doing so. After the capture of dictator Nicolas Maduro by American special forces on January 3, the Cuban intelligence services, who had been providing his security and helping him hold on to power in Venezuela, were unable to prevent the United States operation. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum called the actions of the United States extremely unfair. As she put it, "You can't suffocate a people like that." They don't have fuel for hospitals or schools. At the same time, the Cuban government accused the Trump administration of blackmail and coercion in the United Kingdom. And some Democratic congressmen in the United States, by the way, condemned the blocking of oil imports, and the United Nations warned of a humanitarian crisis. But the White House denies that the crisis was caused by Donald Trump's policies. They say, no, it's not our fault. Moreover, the United States State Department announced that America is allocating $6 million for humanitarian aid to Cuba. This will include canned tuna, rice, beans, pasta, and solar panels for charging phones. Supposedly, it's for the island's residents. The United States is ready to do anything for the Cuban people, even save their lives, but they have no intention of saving the communists in power. Here, to be fair, it should also be noted that even before this oil blockade began, Cuba was already experiencing the most severe and prolonged economic crisis since the communists took power in 1959. Almost 90% of Cubans live in extreme poverty, and 70% of Cubans cannot even eat at least once a day on a regular basis. This data comes from the Social Right Observatory think tank based on survey results. Last summer, that is, already last year, 90% of Cubans said that they were living in extreme poverty. Moreover, more than 70% of Cubans named food shortages and constant power outages as their main problems, which in some regions can last for 18 hours or more a day. The United States blockade, of course, has greatly aggravated these problems, but it was not their root cause. But in fact, Trump's team doesn't hide that their goal is to change the government in Cuba. Even before the blockade began, the Wall Street Journal wrote that Trump's team was looking for people in the Cuban government who would help Washington overthrow the current communist regime by the end of 2026. As the publication wrote, quote, Washington needs someone who understands where things are heading and is willing to make a deal, specifically with the help of such an insider agent. Earlier, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro was captured. In search of a suitable candidate, representatives of the American administration are meeting with Cuban immigrants and community groups in Miami and Washington. At the same time, people in Trump's circle believe that Cuba's economy is on the verge of collapse after the country's authorities lost their vital patron, Maduro. And the United States has cut off supplies of Venezuelan oil. In Washington, they believe that Cuba has never been as fragile as it is now. However, the American administration does not have a concrete plan for his overthrow yet. Nevertheless, the United States State Department has issued an official statement saying that it is in the interests of United States national security. Cuba needs to be governed by a competent democratic government and to refuse to host the military and intelligence services of our adversaries. We're mainly talking about the Russians here, and by the way, about the Russians. The United States Department of the Treasury has officially prohibited Venezuela's oil sector from making any deals with Russia and those countries that cooperate directly with it and are subject to sanctions. At the same time, the United States Department of the Treasury has allowed the export, re-export, transportation and processing of Venezuelan oil by authorized American organizations, as well as the supply of goods, technologies and services for oil exploration and production in Venezuela. And here is a separate order stating that the key condition for all new licenses is a direct prohibition on involving Russia, Iran, North Korea and Cuba, as well as entities controlled by them in any deals. Well, to put it simply, Russians were just kicked out of Venezuela and now they're being pushed out of Cuba. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell and don't forget to like. If you found this episode useful or interesting, you can support our YouTube channel with your donation or subscription through the links and details in the description of this video. I would appreciate any support from you. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.